Hey everyone, let's try that again. So for anyone who was here a little while ago, I think my computer just had a complete meltdown and we crashed. So let's start that again. A massive welcome to a very special episode here on InfoSec Live of the Human CISO, where we're looking at the impact of the recent LastPass breach with Scott Wright, the CEO of ClickArmor. But before we get to that, for those that are new to the channel or even managed to tune in for the first time today, my name is Simon Lindstead, the founder of the InfoSec Live community and also your host for this show. And by sharing stories and best practice over the last few months has led to 30,000 views and nearly 7,000 hours of our content being watched on YouTube by you, our amazing subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, or indeed buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, or maybe a new laptop based on today's experience, we do have a few ways you can show your appreciation. First up, the ability to purchase super stickers in the YouTube chat if you'd like your question bumped up to the top, and 3 tiers of membership allowing you to show your support in any way that you can, and a brand new swag shop located at the top of our channel where you can now buy branded InfoSec Live merchandise. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you're watching this live, please like and subscribe. We want to make these events as interactive as possible, so make sure you do drop any questions in the chat. After all, it is you, our audience, who does make these events that special. And today, very excited to be joined by Scott Wright, the founder of ClickArmor. And after another LastPass breach, many of us are concerned about our data and what we should be doing to safeguard it. So I'm a bit flustered. Let's find the intro stinger and let's bring Scott on. Gotta love technology, Scott.
Oh, it's why we're here, right?
all of a sudden, so I put the countdown video on, and all of a sudden my screen said, "Your stream has failed. Click here to retry." So
it said that to me too, and I thought it was my fault because it usually is.
Yeah. No. Well, look, we're here now, and thank you very much for taking the time to come on today, Scott. And thank you to everyone in the audience who's persevered and put up with the bit of a bumpy ride we've had with the intro. For those that haven't seen you on the show before, do you mind just giving the girls and guys a bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks very much for having me, Simon. It's great to be back again. I'm Scott Wright, CEO of ClickArmor, which is a gamified online learning platform for cybersecurity awareness. And it makes learning about phishing and social engineering much more engaging, fun, and effective. And we work for a lot of information-based businesses as well as partners like managed service providers that really rely on employees managing information securely. And we have foundational courses that use engaging interactive learning challenges, quizzes, puzzles to teach basic concepts and terminology. And then we use immersive simulations that really show people what things are going to look like, whether it's phishing inboxes or social engineering approaches, inquiries by phone or whatever. It's a lot of fun. We also do the optimized live phishing simulations, which a lot of people are used to, and we're trying to wean people off that a little bit. They're often overused and misused, but there's a purpose for them, and we'll work with them. But we have some great gamification features like leaderboards and 3-minute challenges and streaks and stuff that makes it more fun and engaging. Most common comment that we get from people is it's unlike anything they've ever seen before. So love to work with people and try and improve what's broken with security awareness training these days.
It certainly is. And from personal experience, I'll share this story with our viewers quickly. Scott very kindly gave me access to the platform last year, and my wife and I engaged with it, and it is truly engaging. It isn't your standard boring training where you fall asleep, and so much so she's now become the subject matter expert for all the mums on the playground at the school, thanks to your training. So,
Oh, awesome. Let's get it in the school too.
absolutely. Richard, you mentioned that LinkedIn might be having problems. For anyone that is on LinkedIn, if you want to jump onto YouTube, I think it's working fine on here. And again, for everyone in the audience, let's make this interactive. We have got a list of things we're going to cover off with regards to the LastPass breach and how that impacts everyone. But if you've got any questions while we go through, please do just jump in with them, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So, first question, let me get up to where the questions were, because now I've restarted my computer. I haven't got anything ready on the stream. So bear with me. There we go. Well, so yeah, we did go live for about 60 seconds, I think, on the other one, which was good. So, okay. Question from me to start with, which is in the descriptor. Is it
Mhm.
still a good idea to use a password manager? Because I use LastPass still now. Inaction is my middle name. I haven't done anything to change it. So I'm interested to see what you say today.
Yeah, I mean, definitely using a password manager is less risky than writing your passwords down or using the same password across multiple sites. And, we all have dozens of accounts now online, and it's just, a habit sometimes for people to reuse their passwords. And that is really risky because any one of those sites can get breached, and eventually, your password is going to get cracked on one of those sites, and then they use what's called a password or credential stuffing attack, where they try the same user ID password on different sites, and it is risky that someone could break into your account if you are not using different passwords on every site and strong passwords on every site. And that's the value of a password manager, really.
And what about LastPass then? So for people like me who got a bit nervous the first time they got breached, second
Mhm.
time, is it apathy? I'm not sure what it is, but is there anything? I mean, I have changed my master password. To be fair, it was very long and very complex
Yeah.
in the first place. So long and complex, I had to have it written down in a special password book.
Lovely. Actually, if you had a long, complex password, you're probably not at much risk at all. And even though the thing that we all need to be aware of is that somebody somehow got a hold of a backup copy of what we assume to be LastPass's entire vault, of everybody's encrypted passwords. So the only thing standing between the bad guys and your passwords for all your websites is the strength of your password, your master password. So if you had a long and strong password as your master password, there's probably not a lot of risk in you staying on LastPass. But if you didn't, then your best advice is to go back and change all your passwords on any of your sensitive accounts. I'm sure that's one of our questions we're going to discuss later, but that's the bottom line, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the feedback I've seen online is that if you had that complex password, you should be okay. For me, I've changed mine anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Better
It's
to
a
be
good
safe
idea.
than sorry. So, what would you say? I mean, I know this isn't about product recommendations, but would you
Mhm.
say it was still an effective tool to use, or are you recommending your clients to move off to another
Well,
provider?
actually, almost everybody I've talked to is moving off of it. So that's an indicator there. I don't think that means the technology is bad. I think what has come into question is LastPass's practices, in terms of how they disclose breaches and what they have done or not done over the past 10 years that we thought they were doing. And so they may fix everything and it may be a strong password manager going forward, but then it just is a question of, can we really trust them that they're going to, be
You,
continuing to work securely?
you see, I mean, the first breach happened, and there was a lot of security professionals sticking up for their response, sticking up for how upfront they were about declaring and informing their customers about it. But it hasn't been the same with the second one, that's
Actually,
for
they've
sure.
been breached 7 or 8 times. And sometimes I'll give you a little bit of history with the LastPass. They were formed by a guy named Joe Sigrist, probably before 2010. I think it was 2008. That was when I first heard about it. And he was really a well-known, respected expert on passwords, and so the architecture that he put together was really well done. Everybody, when he described it, not everybody got a chance to see the insides of it or how it was actually built, but people trusted him, and he built something very strong, and it seemed to behave the way they described it. And so there were a lot of experts who actually did trust Joe and the LastPass password manager from the beginning. One of them, Steve Gibson, who runs the podcast called Security Now, actually did get a chance to look at the code, and he's vouching for it. He's vouched for it up until about 2 weeks ago. And what really happened over the years, though, was LastPass was purchased by a company called LogMeIn. And that was around 2015, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, we kind of were unsure whether Joe was going to be, still in charge, or, keeping things as secure as possible. And, he stated he was going to be still in charge, and he was still visible and able to answer questions. And they did have a number of breaches over the years, but they were not serious breaches. But what was really notable was they were very transparent and very forthcoming. When they had a breach, they would notify everybody affected publicly, not just people who were affected, but they would put notes on their website and just try and get the word out, that, yeah, they had this problem. Here's what you should do about it. So they were transparent and very responsible up until that point. Now, sometime after the purchase by LogMeIn, we started to see less of Joe, and we were not really sure if he was still running things or not. And then they've had a small number of breaches, some sort of over that period of time as well. Again, they were transparent, but there was less visibility to Joe and a little less certainty about what they were actually doing under the covers. And then in 2019, I think 2018 or 2019, they were spun off as a separate company again. And so now it is, a business on its own, but Joe is nowhere to be seen. And so some of the decisions and PR that we're seeing is clearly, marketing generated and not necessarily what we would want to see and what we had seen from before. So that's the reason why a lot of people are questioning whether or not they should stay with LastPass.
I think as a founder, it sounds like his buyout clause is pretty much at an end, doesn't it?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, that in itself might be a good reason to look elsewhere. Thomas McKenzie, thank you very much for tuning in. Here's a very successful exited founder who's just sold his business that he set up a couple of years ago. So congratulations for that, Thomas, which means you're going to be working for that firm now for a few years, which relates to my comment just then, perhaps. But Thomas did ask, I'll put you at the top so you don't get cut in half. Let me just move you there. There we go. He's read that some of the fields were not encrypted. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, it's a really big point of discussion. There are a number of fields that you kind of expect won't be encrypted because otherwise LastPass wouldn't have enough information to actually decrypt the contents. But some of the fields were known to be not encrypted because of performance and other trade-offs that, for convenience and things like that. You don't necessarily want to have to type in your master password every time you go to a new site to log in. And so there were some fields that we expected to be not encrypted, but it turns out, I think there were a lot more fields that were visible or extractable than we thought. And so when that came about, people are starting to wonder, well, why do they have to store every or make in plain text, every website we've gone to or every IP address that, we've logged in from? Those kinds of things were actually relatively unprotected. And there is question about that. I think there are other password managers that do protect those things in smarter ways. So that is a good question. There's really something to be said for how much of the information should be encrypted by the password manager versus the convenience factor.
The only thing I know is when, as users do, I lost my master password after using it for about 6 months. Mm-hmm. I managed to retrieve that through an email process that didn't involve very minimal security checks. So again, I think there was a point of vulnerability there on the master password reset for someone if they had access to your emails, where you could
exactly. It's a convenience thing. I've done that too. I've been at a point where I just changed my master password and now I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
And so, but I was able to recover it through a text message or something, some other, not necessarily secure, but relatively private method. And, you change it again. So it's a matter of risk, in terms of how much you're targeted, how much your email, as you said, might have been compromised, where somebody could get in. A lot of times, the risk depends on how long something is exposed for. So if you're doing a password reset cycle, as long as you're the one that's asking for it and it comes to you by email and you change it right away, it's a fairly low risk.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, the other questions I had down here, you've kind of covered off a little bit. I think one of them, why did people trust LastPass? I think the history lesson you gave there on where the company came from is probably a big indicator as to why the industry had the trust in
Mhm.
the platform. But the bit I'd like to expand on is what made this breach so much worse than the other ones?
Yeah, and I guess part of that is, it may have or probably started in my mind around August of 2022 when there was a breach, relatively new breach, and it involved apparently in their news release originally, it was, a developer's account was compromised, and some of the things he had access to, like source code, was compromised, but the typical statement, there's no indication that there's any real abuse or access to anybody's secret stuff. Well, then another month or so later, another announcement comes out, and it's not clear whether it's related to the same breach, or if it is the same breach, or if it's something that came because of the the original breach. We're just not sure, and that's really what's bothering people, and what makes the recent activities so concerning is they were not forthcoming the way they used to be about what really was compromised. An example of this is, for example, I mentioned that a backup copy of the entire vault was compromised or stolen by somebody. When they announced that, they didn't say uh, all user accounts were compromised, or they didn't say a subset of user accounts were compromised. It said user accounts were compromised. So you have to assume it's everybody. You can't, without any other guidance. And that's just a sign of how kind of sketchy the responses are getting from them in terms of the transparency on their breach disclosures. And that's really the bottom line. There are other things that we did discover that LastPass has not been doing that we thought they were. And that's also concerning. So the biggest thing that comes to mind is something called the password iterations count. And what happens is when you type in a password, you set your master password, they have to do some cryptographic operations on that to generate a key that actually works to encrypt your vault. It actually happens in two levels. You encrypt a key, and then that key is used to decrypt another key that
Yeah.
decrypts your vault. But the password iteration count is really important. And when LastPass was first created, believe it or not, nobody really thought you needed more than one hash round on the password to get something secure enough to encrypt the vault with. Well, it turns out, after 2008, shortly after people started to realize, what, we need to hash this more times, because rainbow tables, if you aren't familiar with that, you can look it up. It's basically a way to look up from high performance pre-calculated tables, what the resulting password might be from a certain hash. And the more times you hash the password, the more time it will take a cracker to decrypt or look up your password. And so their iteration count went from one iteration. After a couple of years, it went up to, I think, 50, and then 500, and then 5,000 iterations, which sounds like a lot. But by 2013, 2014, I think they changed it to 100,000 hash iterations by default when you create a new account. What was happening, though, was there were some people's accounts whose iteration count never changed from one. And so the iteration count is one of the things that does not get encrypted, because the whole process relies on knowing how many times to hash your password that you put in order to get to the key. But when for some reason quite a few people reported that their iteration count was still one. And what that means is when the attacker sees this encrypted vault, they see a couple of things that are unencrypted and they really want to know about. And one of them is the iteration count. If they take everybody whose iteration count was one, they would put that at the top of the list and say, I only need to hash one time. I even can use a rainbow table probably to figure out what the password is for this. So that was something that, became clear only a couple of weeks ago, that people had not been their iteration counts had not been increased over time with the progress of the product, as new accounts were getting higher iteration counts, and you can change it yourself, which a lot of people did who are security conscious. But if you had not changed it, it might still be one. Have you checked yours lately, Simon?
Clearly not. No, but obviously, with the way my luck goes, I'm clearly one of those where mine is one. Yeah, I think. But before I jump in and get Splodge's question,
Yeah.
for people like me who are now shitting themselves after talking to you about their data being on LastPass, how easy is it to get your data off and move it to another provider if you are gonna use another provider, or how easy is it to get your data off in general?
Yeah. So there's really two implications to that question. One is the technical process of starting to use another password manager, getting all your passwords out of LastPass and into a new password manager. That's actually very easy. I did that in an hour or so, right? Not probably less. One of the problems I had in doing that, and people might have experienced this or should be aware of it. There was something called secure notes in LastPass where you could encrypt just type something in and it would get encrypted as if it was, your passwords or whatever. But it was just a convenient way to store things, like, passwords to Wi-Fi hotspots
Yeah,
that you go to sometimes. But I also stored some longer notes, like pages of stuff I just didn't want to lose. And I think if I remember it was in my LastPass notes, I'll be able to find it. Well, you store some notes in there. And for one thing, those things are not like passwords. You can't just reset them, right? That's just sensitive information. And once it's decrypted, it's out there.
yeah.
So those are challenging things to deal with if you were storing secure notes. But what I found was the length of my secure notes somehow caused a little bit of a glitch on importing it into Bitwarden, which was my new password manager. And so I ended up going back and having to delete some of my secure notes that I didn't really need anymore. And it went in without a glitch. So probably you could do the whole thing in 15 minutes.
And can I ask who you're using now?
I am using Bitwarden. Yeah.
Bitwarden. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're the second person who's recommended. Any other, without making specific recommendations, any other popular names out there that people are
Yeah, for
using?
sure. I'm just I have a little thing myself here where I think I did a poll on a previous session I had done. So there's KeyPass, 1Password, Dashlane, NordPass, Zoho Vault. Zoho is a suite of applications. They have their own vault.
It's like a
Nord,
CRM, isn't it, as well? I think
yeah,
so.
and
Yeah.
NordPass is probably part of the NordVPN group. So they're probably doing things like that as well. There's many others. I mean, a lot of them are trusted. The reason I like Bitwarden and the reason a lot of security people like Bitwarden is it is open source, which means that people can see the source code of it, and we know it's how it's built. And if there are vulnerabilities, somebody's going to find them, hopefully, and they will get fixed, hopefully. So we kind of feel that the open source nature of it just gives us a better feeling, and the business model is interesting with Bitwarden. They basically allow anyone to use the personal version for free, and it's built off of that open source. But they also offer a paid version, which does has more features that are useful for businesses and things like that. So it's just one of those things people kind of prefer, typically open source if possible. Doesn't mean it's guaranteed to be that every bug is going to get fixed, but it's something that people tend to trust.
And at
The
least
other
you can
thing,
look at it. You can look at it yourself and work out if you want to trust it as well, I
if you
suppose.
really, yeah, if you really want to, or you could have somebody look at it and
Yeah.
tell you. The other thing that's interesting though is just because you've moved your passwords from LastPass to Bitwarden doesn't mean you don't have to worry about what was exposed in the original breach by LastPass.
So
We
are
don't know
you?
which version or what date it was actually, put out there, but it means that you really should change all of your old passwords that
Oh,
are in some way sensitive. Not all your old passwords. I've got thousands. I'm not going to change them all, right?
no.
But the ones that are sensitive, I'm going to change.
Yeah. No, that
And you
makes
kind of have
absolute
to
sense.
I talk to a lot of people who are doing sort of a scheduled, I'm going to do 10 a night or something like that, and eventually they'll get there.
I can see that being exactly what happens with me. Yeah. Let's go back to the questions quickly. Going back to disclosure, we were talking about them saying what they disclosed, or maybe not saying what they disclosed. Richard, or Splodge as he's called on here, has said, aren't they supposed to disclose full information by law, especially if they're European clients under GDPR?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on GDPR. I believe they've notified people, but I don't know that the notification, although it might have met the technical requirements for a breach notification, it was not all that helpful and seemed a little bit disingenuous in some cases.
Yeah, okay. A lot of standardized messaging sent out, I think. Now let's just take a break from password managers for a moment, because we like to keep the audience as engaged as possible. And I see we've got Hubert Jambalan in the audience, who has been working in the industry now for 9 months. He's a 20-year-old cybersecurity enthusiast, especially pen testing. So there is still a long way ahead of me. So his questions are: how do you see the cybersecurity industry in the future? That's a generic one, but we'll come back to that. Year by
Yeah.
year, will the technical vulnerabilities become less significant and the biggest risk become social engineering attacks? I'd argue they already are, but I'll let you answer that in a sec. And how do you
Yeah.
see AI in this industry? Chat GPT, for example. If you're interested, Hubert, I did a live stream last week. There's a link to it on the channel where Clint Bedungan from ThreatGen and I and Jessica Bishop interviewed Chat GPT and sort of showcase some of the stuff it can do. For me, I've been trying to access it now for the last 48 hours, and I'm constantly getting the same message, which says, I'll look at it now, Chat GPT is at capacity right now. Get notified when we're back. I don't know if anyone else has been having
Oh
the
yeah,
same
I get
problem.
that all the time. I've tried it a few times, and it's quite common to see that they're at their limit or capacity.
Yeah.
There's another. I just discovered there's a sandbox version, which isn't quite as fun to use, but it can actually be helpful for generating ideas and things like that. I think it's OpenAI dot. Oh, sorry, it's beta.openai.com/playground. Try typing that in and see if that works.
Let me try it. Read that again. Beta.
Beta
Yeah.
dot openai.com
Yeah.
slash playground.
Please log in to access this page.
So yeah, I got that too, and I just clicked through because I had already been logged in with Chat GPT.
Oh, so it should still work. Let me
Yeah.
try. Not a robot. Crosswalks. These trip me every time. There we go. I don't know how I managed to fail those.
So you get a prompt, and you can type in, what are the best places to go in San Francisco for sushi or something, right? And
It's working. Yeah, no, thank you very much. Amazing.
so,
Look at that.
but there are a lot of other tools. It's all based on a technology called GPT-3, I think it is.
Yeah.
And Chat GPT is just a more elegant UI, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it. But if you're dying for a fix of GPT AI, then that might do the trick for a bit.
I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. And while we're on that, the last point of Hubert's question there was around whether SOC analysts or pen testers will be replaced by the AI, or will it only remain as a tool for experts? I mean, for me, what the tools can't do is contextualize things. And you see a lot of it all the time where people are saying that things have been scanned and there's this problem and this vulnerability, but you've got to remember that it's all relative. And until we've got, iRobot AI, which you're probably not old enough to even remember that film, Hugh, but until we've got AI at a point like that, I think we're going to need humans. And for me, if you can learn how to be very adept at using Chat GPT, you're going to be at the top of the pile for jobs moving forward. I don't know what you think about that, Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting issue when you think about what's cybersecurity going to look like in the future. Something I've said in conference talks and things over the last 10 years, and I don't think it's ever changed, is the more we automate and outsource, the simple tasks or the things that can be automated, what does that leave for the employees in a business, right, to do? Though they have to manage what goes into the systems, what comes out of the systems, the exceptions that the systems encounters and spits or dies on, and the configurations, right? So those four areas in general are always going to be humans. There's always going to be human elements to how we deal with technology, and until we get to a point, as you said, iRobot, where everything is done for us and we can all become poets and philosophers,
Yeah.
we're going to have to make decisions. And those decisions are going to have an impact on how the business does, whether it is security breaches or other bad decisions that cost the organization money. So in the end, I think cyber is going to continue to develop and grow, and AI is going to be a huge part of that. It's a cat and mouse game, right? Every time we improve technology for the good and make things convenient and easy for people to do a better job, it's also usable by the bad guys. And so it's always going to be that sort of dichotomy there, where you can never really get rid of the human part of it.
You're always going to need humans, and as Chester rightly says, if it does get to that stage with AI, hopefully Will Smith is still around to save the day. I completely,
Love it.
completely agree. I mean, for older people, me included, it's quite daunting and quite scary how quickly things seem to have progressed. And I think for a lot of people, it's a bit like the iPhone moment for the mobile phone industry many years ago, where all of a sudden everyone's like, now I
Yeah.
see what all the fuss is about. And I think it's the real question is, what's it going to be like in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. Even 3, 4 months ago, when people would mention AI to me, I'm going, yeah, it's always going to be growing and it's going to be helpful. It's used right now in a lot of, threat detection models and things like that. But again, it isn't precise. Usually AI is going by some heuristic rules.
Yeah.
So it's not going to catch everything. And so again, there's going to be the human side, or you're going to need at least multi-layer security. And so I think that's what we're going to end up with is a lot of different technologies that rely on AI to some extent, but there will always be the human aspect of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Right. Let's get
Oh,
back
I had
until we've got
one other thing that I was thinking of. I wanted to mention on
please.
that too is uh, when people used to mention AI and how it's going to or robots are going to take over the world. I mean, they are essentially taking over the world. We just don't know how quickly
Yeah.
it's going to come. But when you think about what's required to do some of the things that would be necessary to take over the world, and you think about how hard it is to get two systems to talk to each other and do what you want them to do, to be scared about things like that was a little bit overstated. But you're absolutely right. I think the chat GPT news was a bit of a wake-up call to a lot of us about how fast this stuff is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, you've already seen some security companies say they've adopted it into different tools, and I
Yeah,
think I'll stand back and just watch to see how those play out before I start adopting any just yet. Perhaps.
yeah, I'm not even using home assistants yet, so
No, no, me neither. Okay, right back to the LastPass discussion. So, best practices then for any password manager, Scott.
well, as we talked about before, make sure you've got a very long password. By very long, I mean at least 12 characters, if not 16 characters, with a mix of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters. There's a really good tool that Steve Gibson, again, somebody I've followed a lot, has. If you were to go to grc.com/haystack, you would find a nice, neat little old school form, and it lets you type in a password. You're not going to type in your own password, but it lets you experiment with different password lengths
Oh,
and different content of passwords. And what he does at the bottom is he calculates how long it would take to crack that password using different technologies. And so it's fun to go in there and look at, if I had a 10 character password that was just uppercase and lowercase characters, it's something like a minute or some seconds for a cracker to get to it. But if you add a character, then it becomes 90. Well, actually, you get to a point where you're using uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters. You're using essentially 95 different possible characters, when you get to that point. And every additional one you add gives you 95 times the strength of the one
okay. Well,
character.
well, here's the question then, which is very relative to me. I've created a 20 character long master password. Where do I
Yep.
save it?
You could put it in a YubiKey. Have you ever used a YubiKey or seen them?
I've actually got. Where are they? Here somewhere. I've got a box of keys that was sent to me that I've never used from Fetian. Is it Fetian Technologies? It was only
Can't
because
remember.
of their dubious Chinese origins that I've never plugged them into
Right,
my machine. But
right, right. Anyway, actually, one of the best things to do for a long password is to take a line out of a story or a movie that you like, or even a comedian's stand up sketch. Right? It's
yeah,
never really been written down anywhere, but you might take something from Sarah Silverman or Louis C.K. or maybe somebody who's got a better reputation, but just take a 5 or 6 word thing that's easy for you to remember, or a line from a song of yours that's from an indie group that nobody's heard of before.
you've been looking at
um,
my record collection, Scott.
there you go. Those are good ways to have stuff that you can remember, and that's the tip that I have for password strength. And then, of course, don't use that same password anywhere else. Don't write it down if you can help it. And then there are password things. Number one tip I would say is don't create a do-it-yourself password management scheme.
Yeah.
Some people will store them all in a Word document and rename it so it's not a doc, it's .xqp or something like that. Oh, they'll never guess what that is. But believe it or not, there is malware that will scan your drive for strings of characters, and it will find them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, what that leads us nicely on to the firm I was working for. I obviously won't name names, but the firm I was working for last year, they gave LastPass to all of their members of staff as part of their onboarding package to keep all their passwords secure.
Mhm.
When it comes to looking at options for businesses,
Yeah.
what should they be looking at?
Right. So, I mean, I think you need to look at a password manager that does support business operations and the features that a business needs. And, Bitwarden does do that. Most of the other ones that I mentioned, KeePass, Dashlane, 1Password, they are all likely able to provide you with business capabilities. So I wouldn't worry too much about which password manager you use, as long as it does have the features for businesses. But I think you also have to, as a business, realize that people are going to use that password manager probably for remembering some personal stuff. And so you need to communicate with people and say, be careful about what you store in your business password manager, because if you leave the company, you may not have access to it anymore, right? So that's something for all of us to remember. Don't rely on
I'm
your
glad I
business.
never used mine. Well, the thing is, I already had LastPass at that point, so it seemed like a bit of an effort to have two master passwords that I'm never going
Yeah,
to remember and struggle to store anywhere. Chester's comment's quite a good one, actually. One technique that he's used before is to pick 3 or 4 random things in your surroundings
yeah,
and concate them. Maybe
yeah,
add a few special characters too. Good idea.
yeah. That's a great idea. It reminds me of the XKCD cartoon. If you've ever seen, if you were to do a Google XKCD horse battery stapler, can't remember what the other one was. And
KCD. Horse. Password
correct horse.
strength. Correct
Yeah.
horse battery staple.
Yes. So 4 random words. He used that little. It's a really popular comic now, that particular one, because he does an analysis of a long password, that is strong for various reasons. He even calculates bits of entropy and stuff like that, and how long it would take to crack. And then he takes correct horse battery stapler or whatever it is, and he does a similar analysis, and it's like 10 times stronger or 100 times stronger. So it's
So
a good idea.
I think
Just
it's
use.
GCHQ have got a campaign on in the UK at the moment,
Yeah.
which is 4 random words, which I think is what they're using for theirs. Okay, so if we can't trust LastPass, we might be able to trust Bitwarden because it's open source. Any
Mhm.
other recommendations for what to look at if you're looking for another password manager provider?
I think your cost is one thing. I mean, most of them are fairly inexpensive or have a free version, but I would just look at what are the features that are available in the version that you plan to use, whether it's free or has a cost. And a lot of those features revolve around convenience, really. And it goes back to our first question of what stuff was unencrypted in the LastPass vault. LastPass was a really convenient thing. One of the things I really liked about it was I would set a geographic region that I'm going to be in, and if anybody tries to log in from outside that region, then I would get notified. First of all, it would fail, and there are other reasons. Actually, I had it nailed down by device. So any new devices that tried to log in had to go through a special authorization process. I really liked that feature. It was convenient because sometimes I would actually, probably more than once a year, I would get caught trying to access my LastPass password vault from another person's device or a computer somewhere, and it would say, "Nope, sorry, don't recognize that." And it wouldn't give you a lot of information. It just said there was a problem with your login, and it takes a minute to realize, oh yeah, I'm on a new device. I go check my email, and sure enough, there's your email notification from LastPass that says we tried to, somebody tried to log in. Was it you? And so you can click yes, and then the next time you try it, it will work. So I really like those features that limit how accessible your account is. But again, that's a convenience thing, and it can weaken the ultimate.
It is a convenience thing, and one of the things I liked when I was paying for the premium version of LastPass that I haven't renewed after the last debacle came out in the press was the fact that I can access them on my phone as well as on my laptop. Although,
Yeah.
unfortunately, unless you pay for the premium service, you can't do that. So, is Bitwarden the same when it comes to
Um,
that?
I don't think they charge you for multiple devices for your personal vault. And what's really nice about another cool feature is everybody starts with a personal vault. And so even if you're in the business mode, all of the users basically start with their own personal vault, and that means they can always access it. They actually create it from their own choice of email address, username, etc. But what happens is it gets linked to the business, and so you can actually be sort of invited by the business to share your vault or have your vault connected to the rest. And so features like that are really helpful, from the point of view of being a little bit mobile or portable.
I mean, what one thing I've just thought of after Splodge made the comment about Apple does that when an unknown device wants to access the account with all the resources people like Apple have. I mean, for me, I've got a MacBook Pro here that I'm using, which failed miserably
Yeah,
45 minutes ago at the start of the stream. I've
yeah.
also got an Apple iPad at the top here because it allows me to do professional looking things on streams like this
Yep.
if I want to. And then I've obviously got an iPhone as well. Am I not safe using Apple's inbuilt
So
password managers?
really a good question. So I would actually, up until recently, I would have said I wouldn't count on it, mostly because browser-based password managers are just not built with the same amount of due diligence as a business that builds password managers. But I learned that Apple actually has its own password manager that was built as a password manager, and it goes across the entire Apple ecosystem. I haven't tried using it yet. I'm pretty much an Apple person, except for the computer that I'm on right now. So I might try that. I just can't remember what they call it. But there is a dedicated password manager that is
Let's have a
comparable, I
look.
think, to the others.
Because it would just make so much more sense for me with so many Apple devices.
Yeah,
If you put Apple Password Manager in, the irony that LastPass comes up top in the ad
I know.
sponsor
Oh,
result.
it's the paid ads. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's iCloud Keychain. It's the one, isn't it?
Set up iCloud keychain. I don't know if that's the
Or
actual.
is that one that you just share it across your devices, isn't it?
That's the one that yeah, manages your Apple IDs, but I don't know if that app manages all of them. And I'm not an expert on that. I wish I had checked on what the name of the Apple
It
one was
says here
called.
how to use iCloud Keychain, Apple's built-in and free password manager is what it
iCloud
says
key,
here.
well, iCloud keychain. Okay, it's not your.
Yeah, so it's set up two-factor authentication. Never have to remember a
Yeah,
password again.
yeah.
It said, yeah,
Good
they
point.
stepped up their game in password management thanks to new features in iOS 15 and Mac OS Monterey and other 2021 releases. So again, it might be worth
Yeah, I've
Might
heard
be
that
worth
this
having a
one
look.
has, certainly more, I think more secure, design and thought behind it than your typical Chrome or Firefox password managers.
I mean, going back to the cloud-based ones, Mike Miller was in the stream earlier, and he made a comment. Where is it? So if I can find it. Good point of not using the same. Oh, is that the one? Same
Yep.
password on different sites. I personally don't trust cloud password managers. They're a huge target, whether or not they are secure. What can you elaborate on what he means by that?
Well, the fact any website that has a lot of stuff that's valuable in one place is a target, right? And so having all of your passwords in a LastPass vault is a single place where people will go. There is, I think, an option in Bitwarden to do your own hosting of your vault, so you don't have to have it in the main cloud that is targeted by everybody. I don't know for sure, but you may be able to put it in Dropbox or someplace like that and have your own storage, which
There's
is a lot less of a
something
target.
else that I've forgotten my logins for. Dropbox. Yeah. I
Join the club.
I had a message the other day saying I was at capacity and I needed to update my details. I tried to log in and I couldn't get in, so I gave up on that one as well.
Yeah.
Stephen Dix mentioned Passbolt also has on-premise as well, or Docker or from source. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um,
Thanks.
we've got a few minutes left. Is there anything I want to touch on awareness training before we
Mhm.
finish up today? Because in relation to what Hector said earlier in the chat about where do you see the threats coming from, if you are one of these sad people who read Gartner reports and similar at the end of each year, it
Mhm.
seems to be over 80% of attacks take place with some sort of social engineering in place. So
Mhm.
what have you done differently at ClickArmor to engage people that others haven't? Because all you hear on LinkedIn and beyond is people moaning about how dull and unengaging their training is. So let's dig into what you've
Yeah.
done differently for a bit.
Yeah. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. It's my favorite topic. So I just to go back a few years, I was an engineer. I worked in large government projects doing risk assessments and security architectures. And the reason I kind of got interested in human vulnerability was because every risk assessment I saw had humans as the top vulnerability. And so I started blogging and podcasting on those topics. But what I then did was I did live training. I did sort of a special lightweight version of a learning management system that was just like everybody else's. Well, there weren't that many at the time, but like everybody else's right now. And the content that I got comments from customers saying, "Oh, it's really good content, right level of technical knowledge required, etc." But it was only deployed once a year, and I could tell that people weren't engaging with it. And a few customers said, could we make this stuff more fun? It's just that they're not paying a lot of attention to it. And so I did some research on gamification and the study of how games have been used in learning. And one of the most important things I discovered is awareness training is a very different kind of training than everything else. Whether you're trying to learn a task or a product or a business process, those kinds of training, everybody knows they need to do, and they're going to use on a daily basis. Whereas any kind of compliance training, and especially security awareness training, is not only boring, but a bit scary. It's like, oh, I got to learn this stuff. It's too technical, or it's just not what I was hired for. I don't have time. Every excuse you can think of, people will use to disengage with that kind of training. And so when I learned about the difference between awareness training and product training, I said, well, we need a different kind of platform. We need something that can engage people from the moment they arrive on the platform with something that's visually dynamic, and it should have a lot of interactivity, because you don't want people to just sort of click next, 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 or start the video and put it up in the corner of the screen and then go do something else. That just defeats the whole purpose. That's not why I started doing this, right? We need people to actually focus and remember. So a highly interactive learning environment is needed. And so what we created was a flexible, scalable platform for creating courses like phishing and social engineering. And it really does allow us to quickly create new content that is fun to play with. I mean, it isn't games. It's really, I describe it as a more enjoyable way of learning what you should be learning. But and in most cases you're forced to learn or forced to go through the training. So if you can do it in a more enjoyable way, then people will engage more, they will do it faster, and they will remember more. So we have a customer, for example, who's been using it for a year and a half, and in the first 6 weeks, they got 90% of 1,000 people, 90% of them finished, the first course that we deployed to them. A year and a half later, 98% of them have completed all of the courses that have been deployed on the platform for them. So it's keeping people, first of all, compliant, and we're helping management with special automated reports that say, okay, here's a report for everybody that reports to this guy, give him this report and say, here's the exceptions. And then you can go to the executive meetings and say, Bill, Jamie, reach out to these people, make sure they get it done. So we provide the reporting for those things. So it's really a holistic approach to trying to make sure that everybody gets through the courses. And at the same time, if they're doing the interactive content, they remember it. And they get a chance to practice things that might be scary to do in real world, or especially scary to do in a live fishing simulation. Maybe some things you can never do as a live fishing simulation, we can put in an immersive simulation where people can just go in and try it out. Didn't work that time, I didn't get the points. Try it again next.
I think for me, one of the big things I loved about it, and maybe it's because I've got quite a competitive nature, was the fact that there's a scoreboard involved. Do you find
the
that
leaderboard
people
is absolutely
engage with that?
There's I'll give a little bit of a secret here. So one of the things that sort of was foundational for me in coming up with the ideas around ClickArmor were what we call game mechanics. And if you're a game developer, you understand the idea of game mechanics are all the little techniques that they use to get you to do things, or little tricks, that you have to go collect things, or all of those things drive activity or behavior. And so there are things like scarcity, right? I'm running out of time, I better do this quickly, right? Or what we call uncertainty or curiosity. What happens if I click this thing this time? Maybe I'll get a different answer. Or the next time I go through this scenario, it might not be the safe one. It might be the suspicious one. And I have to kind of figure that out on the way through. So each of those little game mechanics are used at different times to drive people's behavior in a positive way. There are what's called black hat game mechanics, which are, you can't overuse the timing. In fact, we used to have a timer on one of our quizzes where you'd have 30 seconds to answer, and it was just freaking people out. They just said, I can't deal with this. So we hide the timer. We still use the time to figure out whether or not they get more or less points if everybody gets the answer right. But just, you got to be careful what you show people and what you put people through. So we've fine-tuned all the game mechanics so that it does provide that sort of fun degree of not only immediate engagement, but as you said, the leaderboard. Everybody kind of likes to think they're in the top half of the organization when it comes to proficiency, right? And we, by default, use anonymous names. So when you come in, not everybody wants to have their name up there if they're not confident. So when they come into the platform, we give them an anonymous name, but they can go change it. They can change it to their real name. They can change it to Superman, and they can change their avatar. And we recommend, that an executive, we call it a sacrificial executive, puts their real name on the thing and goes up, and they get in the leaderboard, then everybody will go after them.
That is very true. And you're right. Not everyone is competitive. Not everyone relates or reacts well to time pressures either. So the fact that you can tailor it to what individual people are receptive to, I think, is massively important, because we see a lot of cookie cutter training out there at the moment, especially in bigger organizations where everyone goes through the same stuff and not everyone reacts to it the same way.
The shortcut is that a lot of technology companies have a awareness training that's free to check, has a checkbox, right? So, you don't need to buy training, you can just get it from us. But it's usually out of date and just as boring as anything else.
Yeah.
So
no,
be careful.
And Andrew Bunch. Hey, Andrew, good to see you. Met Andrew for the first time on a call last night. A very, very bright individual with a great career ahead of him in cybersecurity. He said, "Participation medal, please." And I think you do get those, don't you?
Yep. We're giving out streaks. For example, if we do 3-minute gamified challenges. So every week you would be invited to do a fishing challenge or a social engineering challenge, and if you miss one, you lose your streak. Yeah, but you do them every week before the next one comes out. You get your streak.
And you importantly can reiterate, your top whatever percent in the organisation, which seems to be quite a popular tag on many people's profiles in
Yep.
relation to certain gamification tools out there at
There's
the
so
moment.
many possibilities. I mean, we're just getting started. It's a really fun platform.
It's really exciting, and for anyone who's interested, there is Scott's LinkedIn link. Prior to that, in the chat, if I point at the right place, where are we?
Other way.
There
There
we
you
go.
go.
Click on a link to the site as well. Please do check that out. Scott, any final words for anyone looking to change their password manager before we wrap things up?
I think just as we talked about, make sure you got a long, strong password. Don't reuse it, and don't reuse passwords. Across sites. Most password managers have a facility for generating strong passwords, and it works pretty well from site to site. I just have a problem sometimes if I'm on different devices and it doesn't always know to fill it in. So I don't rely on those typically, but it's nice to have that ability that you can just push a button and it will generate a nice long string for you that is totally random.
You've just got to save it somewhere safe. I'm hoping, Scott, that you're going to come back and do a few more of these sessions with us on different
Yeah,
topics as well.
absolutely. This has been a lot of fun, Simon. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate the comments from people and the questions. Love to do it again.
Amazing. Thank you. Maybe we can both dig in and have a look at the Apple situation before then for
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
Apple lovers out there, because
Do a little
for
follow
me,
up.
it would be a lot easier if I could use Keychain rather than adding another password manager to my list of passwords that I've got to remember. So,
Yeah.
look, Scott, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And everyone who's tuned in, apologies for the mishap with the misstart for the show. Thank you for sticking with us and thank you for your engagement and questions. One quick thing I want to mention before we go, for those of you, some of you who are watching will already know, but we are kicking off the InfoSec Live UK and United States tour in February. On February the 23rd, we're kicking off in Cambridge, United Kingdom, at the Old Technology Museum with 30 industry leaders, very laid back atmosphere, a chance to knowledge share, network, and collaborate rather than have sales pitches thrown at you. Like I said, the first one is in Cambridge, UK, but the next are going to be at the end of March in Atlanta, Georgia, and Tampa Bay, Florida. More UK events and more US events to be released soon. And if there are any businesses out there who are interested in collaborating or sponsoring any of these events, please do reach out to me today. And for everyone who's watched this, if you've enjoyed it, please make sure you like and subscribe. Back in a couple of days with a member who was in the chat a little while ago, Mr. Mike Miller, to hear all
Yeah.
of his role in the industry. Going to be digging into that. Very excited. Thank you so much. I'll stop talking now, play an outro, and see you all soon. Thank you, Scott.
Bye, folks. Thanks.
Take care.